Good afternoon, class. This is a virtual lecture on Study Guide 6. Before anything else, I'd like to make an announcement. We're going to have a final exam, which is going to be sometime in early September. No particular date yet, but its coverage is going to be from Study Guide 6 to Module 9. Now, let's go to the objectives of this module, which is entitled Population Changes Over Time. After finishing the module, the student should be able to, number one, develop an appreciation of the importance of genetic variation among populations. In the process, you will be able to have an understanding of the significance of survival of the fittest or fitness and fecundity in natural selection, and know the mechanisms or processes in the changes in genetic variability in a population. Second objective is for you to know the allelic frequency. In this connection, you will learn how to compute for allelic and genotypic frequency based on web-based video entitled Amoeba Sisters, and you are expected to be able to explain how allelic and genotypic frequencies and the traits they control change over time. Number three objective is for you to be able to know some aspects of the relationships between the biological concepts of change and adaptation in living systems and social and cultural changes. There are study helps for this module. There are recommended web-based resources, additional readings, and so it is essential that you watch or read these resources. Early on, I'd like you to remember the relevant terminologies and concepts. I have 15 of them, namely natural selection, evolution, fitness, fecundity, directional selection of climate effects, phenotype, adaptation, differential reproductive success, gene pool, mutation, evidences of higher fitness, niche, multi-drug resistance, allele frequency, gene, genome, Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium, directional selection of climate effects, and regressive evolution. Now, we begin with a discussion on the gene pool. First, the definition of a gene. You know that the gene is the basic unit of inheritance that facilitates the transfer of traits from parents to offspring. These traits being stored in the information carried by the DNA. Genes may come in alternative forms called alleles. Now, for every trait, there is a dominant allele represented by a capital letter, for example, A, and a recessive allele represented by the little a. The number of types of alleles determine the different traits that may be expressed by an individual. Now let's define the gene pool. The gene pool consists of all the genes in every individual in a population of one species, that is redundant, of course, at any given time. Let's go to the illustrations on how genotype influences trait expression. Let us have three examples: albinism, polydactyly, and baldness. Now, first on the trait of albinism. Albinism is having a white colored skin, okay? This is controlled by a single gene pair, but two types are available to pair, forming a genotype, the dominant allele and the recessive A allele. Now, when the individual inherits two dominant alleles, called homozygous dominant, or one dominant allele and one recessive allele, the individual has normal skin. But when the individual inherits homozygous recessive, then the individual is an albino. Let's go to the trait of polydactyly, having extra digits, fingers or toes. The trait manifestation is controlled by the presence of the allele big P. Presence of homozygous P or heterozygous P leads to extra digits. Presence of homozygous recessive P or small p leads to normal number of fingers. Now we go to baldness. This is an example of a sex-influenced trait. It is controlled by a gene pair whose expression varies between sexes. Let's look at this. In males, the presence of a dominant allele BB or B or heterozygous dominant big B, small b, results in baldness. Homozygous recessives, on the other hand, will result in normal hair. Now in females, the presence of BB, capital BB, results in baldness. Presence of homozygous recessive, small b, and heterozygous dominant will result in normal hair. Now they say that the difference between sexes is due to the higher testosterone level in males. Now we answer the question, what happens when the gene pool of a species becomes endangered? Well, let's look at the conditions when the gene pool becomes endangered. Example one is the endangerment that is caused by IVF, that is in vitro fertilization. IVF causes the introduction of genes by individuals with a lower fertility rate. In other words, the babies that result from IVF manifest a lower fertility rate. Example two, the gene pool would be endangered because a sick person does not follow medical instructions. Then there could be a development of more antibiotic-resistant bacteria. This is known as regressive evolution. If you have watched our recommended video, you've heard of the person sick with TB who chose not to follow medical instructions, but consumed his antibiotics and stopped consuming them too early before the said date due by the doctor. Now, that leads to the development of the antibiotic resistant bacteria. These are the bacteria that were not killed when the person stopped taking in the antibiotics before all the bacteria were killed. This type of a phenomenon is called regressive evolution. It is regressive because it is headed towards the lesser beneficial condition. Example three is the effect of technological progress. We now have this technology that makes use of CRISPR DNA editing tool. This one is a technology that makes a cut on the particular segment of the DNA that is desired to be taken out. And so the result is an altered gene pool. Let's look at genetic drift and natural selection. When do we have genetic drift? This happens in a small population. It is manifested in the appearance of certain genotypes when parents are eliminated or do not reproduce. Their genes are lost, and those members that remain are left in the gene pool. Let's go to natural selection. Natural selection is a process where certain genes or genotypes are favored, as seen in their increased fitness and expressed fecundity. Now, what happens when humans subvert many aspects of natural selection? Well, one possible thing to happen is there will be directional selection, as seen in the sick individual with TB who chose to stop taking in antibiotics before completion of the instruction of the doctor. Stoppage of antibiotic intake when this is not yet due would leave resistant bacteria or germs to multiply, now leading selection in the direction of the bad bacteria. An example of regressive evolution is evolution of the bacteria not headed in the right direction for human health and well-being. Another way by which humans subvert many aspects of natural selection is when humans themselves do the selection. Now let's look at the factors that change populations over time. This could be mutations, where mutation is a sudden heritable change. Another factor would be immigration, going in, an addition of new variants, or immigration when individuals leave the gene pool. Another factor to change populations over time is sexual reproduction. Another factor is natural selection. Natural selection, you see, favors individuals with a high fitness. That is, they should be able to survive and reproduce. Natural selection also favors fecundity. In other words, it favors individuals with a great ability to bear offsprings. Then another factor to change populations over time would be the human force as a selection factor. Let's talk about evolution in other systems. In this particular topic, we look at the relationship between biological evolution and social and cultural changes. Now we know that social and cultural aspects of life also evolve because of changing tastes. There are fads and fashions, you see, and there are people who go for these fads and fashions. They change their tastes. There's modern conveniences offered by change. There's evolution of technological change that dictate change of tastes and preferences in society. Like, for example, the development of new models of the cell phone would cause you to change your taste also and preference for the new model of cell phones. And lastly, there is a need for human society to achieve something much better than that of the past. Now let's take a look at the processes that cause changes in the gene pool. We have this figure in the very last page of your study guide 6. We look at this figure starting from the left-hand side. We see that mutations add new genes. Immigrants into gene pool add new genes. So the gene pool of a species is caused by sexual reproduction within the gene pool that produces new combinations. Immigrants remove genes from the gene pool. The gene pool is exposed to the environment, and the environment comes up with environmental factors that determine reproductive success. Meaning to say that environmental factors determine which individuals survive, how well each individual reproduces, and which individuals are chosen as mates. And so when these things happen, you of course come up with an altered gene pool. So these are the processes that cause changes in gene pools that lead to evolution.